All right, good afternoon. A couple of programming notes. As a reminder, you're welcome to come in tomorrow, but nobody will be here. It's Good Friday. It's an official UN holiday. We will not be briefing, but as usual, we'll be available by all sorts of electronic communication means if you need to reach us. We'll be back here on Monday. As soon as I'm done here, you'll have a briefing by the permanent representative of Kuwait, Ambassador Al-Banai, in his capacity also as chair of the intergovernmental negotiations on the question of equitable representation on an increase in the membership of the Security Councils and other matters related to the Security Council. He'll be obviously here to brief you on the negotiations related to that issue. After that, Guilherme Canela de Souza Godoy, the director of UNESCO's Memory of the World program, will join us from Paris to brief on UNESCO's Memory of the World Register. It's worth mentioning that UNESCO added 74 new documentary heritage collections to its Memory of the World program that cover a large variety of formats and topics, including scientific revolution, major milestones of multilateralism, and you'll hear more about that from our friend Guilherme. And finally, on Monday, my guest will be David Carden, who is the outgoing Deputy Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the Syrian crisis. He will be there, he will be here, or rather here virtually from Gaziantep in Turkey to brief you on the situation in Syria. Our Deputy Secretary-General, Amina Mohammed, today took part in the second day of the Partnership for Growth Summit in Viet Nam. She joined a business dialogue with leaders focused on public-private partnership for innovation and sustainability. Ms. Mohammed also met with Luong Quang, the state president of Vietnam. They discussed the UN-Vietnam cooperation on the acceleration of the Sustainable Development Goals. They also discussed peacekeeping and climate action. On the margins of the summit, Ms. Mohammed also met with the Prime Minister of Vietnam, Pham Minh Chinh, and Nguyen Hoang Long, the Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade. Their discussion centered on Vietnam's green and digital transformation, as well as economic diversification. The Deputy Secretary-General also visited an electric vehicle factory in Haiphong, where she saw firsthand how manufacturing is attracting investment, creating skilled jobs, and advancing Vietnam's path towards a zero-emission future. And over the next 2 days, the Deputy Secretary-General will chair the annual retreat of UN resident coordinators in the Asia-Pacific region. Their discussions will focus on accelerating the SDG implementation across the region and mobilizing investments around key transitions. She'll be back here on Sunday. A quick note to flag that the fourth session of the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent is ending today, and I hope you had a chance to take some of the events in this week. Before the announcement of the conclusion and recommendations of the session, there'll be a closing event entitled Haiti's Independence Debt 200 years later. As you can imagine, the event will provide an opportunity to discuss France's imposition of a, quote, independence debt on Haiti, the current crisis, as well as the country's deep historical connections to movements for the human dignity, rights, and self-determination of Africans and people of African descent worldwide. The event is taking place at 3 p.m., and it will, of course, be broadcast by our friends at UN Web TV. Turning to the humanitarian situation in Sudan, the World Food Programme tells us that one of its teams has successfully arrived today in the greater Khartoum area, where they are coordinating with local authorities to scale up assistance in Khartoum. The WFP aims to expand aid deliveries to nearly 1 million people over the coming months. Our colleagues also tell us that a convoy carrying 14 trucks carrying over 280 metric tons of food and nutrition supplies has arrived in Jabal Awaliya, which is south of Khartoum, and that arrival took place this morning. This area is one of the areas that is at high risk of famine, so the delivery is well needed. This is the first delivery in Jabal Awaliya since last December. These first aid convoys are carrying assistance for about 23,000 people, and additional trucks are en route. The convoy is just one of many planned aid deliveries to the greater Khartoum metropolitan area over the coming weeks. Yesterday, we and our humanitarian partners delivered 1,700 metric tons of emergency food in Tawilia in North Darfur State. Also yesterday, a local partner launched a water trucking initiative to support 10,000 newly displaced human beings with clean water in the area of El Fasher. Meanwhile, cross-border and cross-line aid deliveries continue. During the month of March, 156 trucks carrying over 5,600 metric tons of assistance entered Sudan via the Adre crossing from Chad, while 146 trucks transported more than 4,000 metric tons of aid in other parts of the country. However, Sudan is also one of these areas countries where we are facing bureaucratic obstacles to being able to deliver the aid that we need. The humanitarian access is being severely undermined by delays in visa approvals for humanitarian personnel. Only 16% of visa applications were approved in March, an alarming drop from the previous month, which was around 50%. All of that can seriously affect life-saving operations if that trend continues downwards. All of this aid is crucial to help the vulnerable communities, and our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that aid organizations are working hard to meet urgent needs. As we flagged this week, more than 400,000 people had to flee violence, most of them from Zamzam camp. The majority have fled to the towns of El Fasher and Tawilia, where host communities are already under immense strain. And just as a reminder that access to Zamzam remains completely blocked, local authorities and partners' reports indicate that armed groups continue to shell El Fasher and surrounding areas, including Abu Shuk camp, which is obviously placing all of the civilians there at great risk. We continue to call for the immediate cessation of hostilities in Sudan and urge all parties to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law, ensure the protection of civilians, and allow safe and unhindered humanitarian access. Turning to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that the volatile situation in North and South Kivu provinces continues to fuel the displacement crisis. The neighboring provinces of Tanganyika is also experiencing the impact of this instability, where thousands of displaced people are sheltering in schools, which is, of course, disrupting the educational activities of the students who would be studying there. In North Kivu's Ruchuru territory, more than 25,000 men, women, and children, mostly people who've already been displaced, have arrived in the town of Kanyabayonga, and that has been since April 8th. They've been fleeing armed violence in Walikale and Lubero territories, and they need health care, they need food security, and essential household items. Support is also limited in the area, with only one of our partners being operational. Moving to Goma, our partners warn there that half of the displaced women and children living in collective centers are impacted by protection incidents. Resumption of basic social services in the areas required to meet needs and mitigate exposure to protection risks. In Tanganyika, local authorities report that nearly 1,200 children have been unable to attend school for over a month in the village of Lukwangulo in the Kaleme territory. An estimated 3,000 people displaced are using the two schools as shelters. Since February, the Kaleme territory has been hosting more than 50,000 people. Many of them live in school facilities, churches, and other public buildings. Authorities, in coordination with OCHA, the International Organization for Migration, and partners, plan to relocate them to existing sites. And in South Kivu, local health officials report a cholera outbreak in Minova area in Calais territory, with over 100 new cases reported between the 6th and the 12th of April. Response efforts are underway. They include medical treatment and infection chain control with support from health partners. The Minowa area is also experiencing a surge in Mpox cases, with 41 cases reported in week 15 compared to just 14 the week before. In Ituri province, local health officials announced that some health services have resumed in the Fataki hospital as of April 15th after nearly a month of suspension due to the ongoing violence. And Turning to Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warns that humanitarian supplies are nearing total depletion since Israel imposed a full closure on the entry of cargo, including humanitarian aid, into the Gaza Strip on March 2nd. More than 2 million people remain trapped inside Gaza. Ongoing hostilities and dwindling aid supplies have driven up stress levels, especially among children, with mental health needs growing by the day. Life-saving services are on the brink of collapse. For example, in Gaza City, only 3 ambulances for the Palestinian Red Crescent Society out of 30 are currently operational, and that's due to the lack of fuel to operate those ambulances. Despite these challenges, last week, Health Partners distributed emergency health kits to some 3,000 people in Gaza and Khan Yunis. As we flagged here several times, the water sector has been heavily impacted by hostilities, with almost 90% of the water assets, including wells, pumping stations, and sewage treatment plants, either destroyed or partially damaged. We reiterate that Israel, as the occupying power, has clear obligations under international law, which includes ensuring food, medical supplies, and public health services are available, and also obligated to facilitate humanitarian relief when they are not being otherwise supplied. Meanwhile, OCHA reports that displacement continues at scale. Partners are distributing bedding sets as more than half of the population in Gaza needs some form of emergency items now. OCHA stresses that civilians must be protected whether they leave or they stay. Those fleeing must be allowed to do so safely, and they must be able to voluntarily return when the situation allows. Turning to the West Bank, the Israeli forces' operations in the northern West Bank, which started on January 21st, as you'll recall, in Jenin, continue with thousands of people displaced as a result and unable to return to their homes. In Jenin and Tulkarm governorates, our humanitarian partners are providing urgent aid, including health and psychological support, or psychosocial support, Meanwhile, access to education remains impeded, as more than a dozen schools in the Tulkarm, Jenin, and Nur Sham refugee camps remain closed due to operations by Israeli security forces. This deprives thousands of students from their rights to education. Additionally, hundreds of students in East Jerusalem risk being unable to complete their academic year due to the closure of educational facilities based on orders issued by Israel to UNRWA. Moving to Europe and Ukraine, our humanitarian colleagues in Ukraine tell us that yesterday evening the city of Dnipro in east-central Ukraine was hit by a massive drone attack again. According to authorities, the attacks killed and injured civilians, including children, apartment blocks, a school site, and displaced people and other civilian infrastructure were damaged in the attack. Also yesterday, heavy shelling impacted in the regions of Kherson and Kharkiv, also causing civilian casualties, including children and health workers. An ambulance and multiple homes were also damaged. That's what local authorities are telling us. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that hostilities also continue in Donetsk region following overnight attacks. Aid workers in Dnipro and Kharkiv responded immediately. In coordination with first responders, they provided medical transport, hot meals, emergency shelters, and psychosocial support. Back here, the Security Council this morning held a session on Libya. Briefing council members, Hannah Tete, the special representative of the Secretary-General, engaged in extensive consultations with Libyans from all walks of life: political, military, security, judicial, oversight institutions, political parties, civil society, women's groups, and also the diplomatic community. Ms. Tete stressed that political will for compromise is crucial to develop a consensual roadmap resolving Libya's political crisis and completing the transition. Elections must be integrated into a comprehensive political framework, promoting state building by unifying and strengthening institutions. Ms. Tete noted that the 2020 ceasefire agreement is largely holding, but that security situation remains volatile. She added that one of the tragic consequences of Libya's divided institutions is the vacuum in which armed actors are able to perpetrate human rights violations with impunity. Her remarks were shared with you. And today, our colleagues at UNHCR remind us, that tomorrow, not today, tomorrow, 10 years ago on April 18th, 2015, Europe witnessed one of the largest tragedies at sea when 1,000 human beings died or went missing in the Mediterranean as their boat capsized between Libya and the Italian island of Lampedusa. Since then, UNHCR noted that 34,000 people are reported to have died or gone missing while trying to reach Europe by sea, with the actual number obviously expected to be much higher. UNHCR pointed out that a decade on, some gains have been made in responding to distress at sea, to receive asylum seekers and to address their needs in Europe with responsibility, sharing solidarity, principles that are right now codified in the EU pact, but UNHCR stressed that more is needed to prevent this senseless loss of life. Finally, no, not finally. One more note. Since we won't see each other against next week, Sunday, what will you all be doing? Easter. And in what language should you be celebrating Easter? In Chinese, because Sunday is Easter and it is Chinese Language Day. As a reminder, language days here at the UN celebrate multilingualism and cultural diversity. I do not know how to say Happy Easter in Chinese, but Deji, I'm sure, will tell us in a second. But before that, I have a quiz today. 2 new countries paid their dues in full. The first country is an archipelago in the Indian Ocean consisting of 1,200 islands. It also is the least elevated nation in the world, with the highest natural point being only 8 feet above sea level. Maldives. Very good, Deji. As my wife would say, I make everything about me. So, what is the country with the most Michelin restaurants? France. Very good. What is the country with the second most Michelin restaurants that actually paid its dues in full today? No? 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 Japan. It is Japan. Japan, known for its culinary delights, has the second most restaurants with Michelin stars. We thank our friends in Male and in Tokyo for their paying up, which brings us up to 95. Deji, that is a lot of money. Deji, please.
I know
that we first.
I know the answer
Sorry.
of that. I know the answer of Maldives because the former PJ Shahid just said that that's basically 8 feet tall,
Okay.
above sea level. Happy Easter in Chinese, 复活节快乐. Can you remember that?
I will try.
Okay, so yesterday I asked Stephanie about the U.S. Statement on the condemnation of U.S. Extend the mandate of Albanese.
Yes.
And she clearly answered that's the decision by Human Rights Council, not the Secretariat. And that also drew criticism from some people, said that the SG didn't give support to its rapporteur. How are you going to address those criticisms?
It's not. There is a human rights architecture, right, which is vast. One part of that architecture are the special rapporteurs. Special rapporteurs provide a very important work and information for that human rights architecture. This is an architecture created by member states, right? We fully support that architecture. We've always said about every special rapporteur that they are independent from the Secretary-General. That has not changed, right? If member states are unhappy with who is nominated by the Human Rights Council to be special rapporteurs, that is an issue they need to take up with other member states.
Well, okay. First, sadly, that country withdrew from Human Rights Council. And secondly, you said those rapporteurs, they provide important information, and the Secretary-General support the architecture, but he's not in support for the particular rapporteurs.
It is not for him to pick and choose which special rapporteur he supports and which he doesn't support because of what they said.
The information they are going to take to be important.
That they report to the Human Rights Council. This organization, as you know as well as I do, Deji, is complicated. And I rely on you to explain to your viewers the complexity of this organization. Your next question, if any, otherwise I will move to Edie. Yeah.
Thank you, Steph. With the dwindling of supplies, with no supplies going into Gaza since March 2nd, can we get an update on how close the United Nations is to having no food and no fuel in the territory?
The short answer is extremely close. But as in any situation where supplies are very low, we keep stretching it, right? So it's not I can tell you that yesterday there'll be nothing, tomorrow there'll be nothing left. Whatever is left, we're trying to stretch it and stretch it and stretch it. But when you keep stretching something, at some point it breaks. But it's hard to predict exactly when that breaking point is, but I can tell you we're not far from it. Yes, ma'am, and I apologize.
No worries. So I have about two questions, and I think you were asked earlier this week about an internal memo that was from the Trump administration, which sort of detailed, their plans to cut funding from the UN and several other UN organizations. And I believe you said at the time that you didn't have any comment on that. So my question to that is, has there been contact between the Secretary General and the President?
If there had been, I would have told you.
All right, thank you. My second question, and this is on a different matter. I'm not sure if you may be aware that the de facto authorities in Myanmar announced a couple of weeks prior that they had confirmed the return of at least 180,000 Rohingya refugees from Bangladesh in the coming weeks. So I wanted to ask what the UN's position is on this plan.
I will check with our UNHCR and IOM colleagues if they've registered any returns. The point to keep in mind is that for any return of people, any return of refugees to their home needs to be done in a safe, dignified, but most importantly, in a voluntary basis.
All right, and just a quick follow-up. Then is the UN involved?
I will check.
Thank you.
Madame Sirife.
Thank you, Stéphane. I also have a question on the Trump administration. As you may know, the administration has revoked the visas of foreign students in more than about 30 states across the U.S., and mostly for their pro-Palestinian stance. And one of these students is Rumeysa Öztürk. She's a PhD student at Tufts University. And if you will allow me to note, she has actually not been accused of any crime, but she faces the risk of deportation for an opinion ed that she co-authored in their school newspaper. So does the Secretary General fear that this may turn into a campaign to silence these pro-Palestinian supporters? And what kind of impact do you think this may have overall on free speech?
I can't predict what will happen. I can tell you a few things. One is that we firmly stand in the rights of people all over the world, wherever they are, whether they're journalists, whether they're students in universities, to be able to speak freely, peacefully, without fear of retribution, harassment, arrest, or worse. Right. Every country also has the right to manage its own borders, but we do feel it is important it is done in a way that respects people's rights and their dignity. Madame.
Actually, a question follow-up to that madam's question. We heard that UN last month sent an email to remind staff to carry their ID documents. And so just a quick update. Have you heard of anyone actually having checked their ID?
No, I have not. Please, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Steph. Russia has suspended its ban on the Taliban. Do you have any comments on this regard?
No, I mean, it's a sovereign decision of the Russian Federation. The Taliban status within the UN as decided by member states remains unchanged. Deji and then Sinan, sorry.
First?
No,
Okay,
I'm
right.
still the boss here,
All right,
but
okay,
thank you.
cool. There's a report that Arab group countries, they launch bid for Palestine ambassador for the UN General Assembly presidency. Can Secretariat confirm this? And
Sounds like a wonderful question for
for
the very
Sharon.
able spokeswoman for the President of the General Assembly.
Okay.
Sinan.
Thank you, Stéphane. I have a couple of questions. Miss Rosemary DiCarlo was in Damascus a couple of days ago, and I wonder if she's going to make any statement about her visit.
Yeah, we have not gotten any updates from her travel, but maybe we can see what we can get for you.
Do you have any details about her visit there? Do you think she was only in Damascus or she was traveling? No. Okay.
If I had something, you would be the second person to have it, Sinan.
Last one. I'm sure you received this question before. As you know, there is a new dialogue between the United States and Iran.
Yeah.
And what's the Secretary General's view, or does he have any comment?
Yeah, I mean, we very much hope that the dialogue between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran yields a positive outcome, which we're seeing the lowering of tensions in the Gulf region, in the Middle East, and between the two countries. We understand that there'll be a second round, from what I've seen, I think this weekend, which in itself is a good sign, and we'll obviously be following it very closely. Okay, I will leave you for our next programming note, which is the Permanent Ambassador of Kuwait.